Welcome to another Leadership Impact Night. I'm Pastor Benjamin Wilson, and I am excited that you are here because this is not just another leadership talk. I know there are a lot of videos, a lot of streams where they have these kind of moments, but friends, this is different. This is an invitation. This is an invitation for you to step into the leader you were always meant to be. Because whether you know it or not, whether you believe it or not, leadership is not just for a select few people, it's for you as well. What if I told you that leadership isn't about a title, but leadership is a calling that you're already walking in, whether you realize it or not? Let that sink in. It's a calling that you're already working. And see, the difference between where you are and where you're called to be isn't opportunity. It's not that. The difference is awareness. Too many people are waiting for permission to lead. But real leaders awaken to the fact that leadership is already inside of them. And that's where so many people get stuck. They get stuck thinking that leadership starts when someone else chooses them to lead. They think it starts when they get a title. They think it starts when they're given a bigger platform. But the truth is this: if you're waiting for permission to lead, you're already behind. Some of the greatest leaders in history weren't invited to the table. Friends, they built the table. They didn't wait for approval. They moved forward with conviction. Something inside of them compelled them to act and to move forward. Leadership isn't given, it's activated. And the moment you realize you don't need someone else's approval to step into your calling, that is the moment your leadership journey truly begins. What's different about tonight versus any other night in any other videos is that tonight I want to join you in the journey of unlocking and seeing the leader within you. And I'm telling you this: once you see that leader, trust me, you can't unsee it. So for the next few moments, I'm going to ask you to grab a notebook, lean in, get rid of all the distractions, and let's start this journey. I want to start by sharing a story with you, not one that's my own, but a conversation I had with someone that was in a similar place that many of you might find yourselves in tonight. For the sake of this story, we're going to call this young man David. David was an awesome man. We're going to call him David again. And I want to make sure that I can protect David's story and who he is. I'm changing some of the details that would identify who he is. David, I'm an amazing young man, young in his mid, successful in his field, well respected at work, among his peers, among his family. But when David came to me, he was a bit frustrated. David was like, Pastor Ben, I am upset. I feel I'm supposed to leave, but I don't know if I have what it takes. I don't have the experience that others do. I didn't go to school that they did. I don't have the degrees that they had. I'm not even the loudest voice in the room. And sometimes I feel that when I'm speaking or when something comes up, I look past because I don't have a title. Y'all could hear his frustration. He was waiting. He was waiting for someone to recognize him, waiting for someone to invite him into leadership, waiting for permission to step into what he already knew deep down he was called to do. He was waiting for these outside people to recognize and call out the leader in him. But what I said to David was this: tell me about your job. As he began to tell me, I started to notice something. Every time there was a problem, David was one of the people that they turned to for guidance. Whenever there was a tough conversation among peers or among any of his friends, is not just work, but period, that someone needed to have, they would trust him to handle it. Even among his close friends and community, people naturally gravitated toward him for advice, for him to give them direction. But here's the crazy thing. And all of that, David couldn't see it. He was already leading, but because he didn't have an official title, he didn't recognize the influence that he was already carrying. And that's when I shared with David something that someone told me years ago. I remember them saying, man, you don't need a title to lead. You just need to recognize the influence you already have and steward it well. And I'll never forget how David paused when I shared that with him. It was like something clicked. He had been waiting for validation when in reality he had already been leading all along. He had already been doing it, and that was a game changer because leadership isn't something you step into; it's something that you wake up to. Some of you watching right now might be feeling stuck, waiting for a position or for someone to validate you, for someone to recognize the leader that you are. But let me challenge you with this. If you're waiting for permission to lead, you'll wait your whole life. Leadership starts now. And I'm going to show you how to unlock it. At least I'm going to do my best to give you the key so that you can. Leadership is not about the title, it's about influence. You've heard me say that before. I want to look at Jesus. He didn't hold a political office. We know who he was. He didn't have a corporate position. He wasn't seated in the courts of Rome making governmental decrees. He didn't walk into religious institutions and into the institutions of his time, and they gave him a title of authority. Still, he carried more influence than any other ruler at his time. Why? Because he led from his identity, not from a position. Think about it. When Jesus spoke, crowds gathered. When Jesus moved, people followed. And it wasn't because of a position he handed that was handed down to him by men. It wasn't because of credentials or degree. It's because he knew exactly who he was and he walked in the truth with authority. John 8:12 says, I am the light of the world. In John 10:11, he says, I am the good shepherd. Over and over and over again, he established his identity, not by worldly titles, but by divine purpose. His influence wasn't tied to a seat of power. It was tied to the fact that he was power. And that's what made Jesus unstoppable. Because when you lead from identity, you don't need external validation. The external means nothing when you know who you are. You're not waiting for permission. You're not measuring your impact by a title or a position. You move with authority because you already know who you are and whose you are. And you know that the person that has called you and made you a leader is powerful and has handed that power and authority to you. Now, I know some of you might be saying, yeah, man, but that's Jesus. And I hear you. But let me remind you of this. That principle isn't just for Jesus. It's for you, it's for me, it's for every person who chooses to walk in the identity that God has placed on their lives. If you know who God has called you to be, it's for you. If you need proof beyond Jesus, let's just go back a couple generations and look at David. Before David became king, he was a shepherd, no royal title, no political power, just a kid out in the fields, tending with sheep while his brothers were fighting wars and making names for themselves. David was messing around with sheep. And when the prophet Samuel came to anoint David, to anoint the next king, y'all, David wasn't in the lineup. He wasn't even in the house. He said, bring all your sons. And David was forgotten. His own father didn't bring him forward. But watch this. When God spoke to Samuel, he said something powerful. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance. They look at degrees. They look at pedigree. They look at connections. But the Lord looks at the heart. David didn't need a throne to be king. He needed to first recognize who he was in God's eyes. And even after being anointed, he didn't walk straight into kingship. If you've been to church and heard something before, you know this. He went back to serving in obscurity, leading in the shadows, and faithfully stewarding what was in front of him, sheep. He didn't wait for a title to validate his leadership. He started leading right where he was, with the sheep, with the slingshot, and with a heart that was fully surrendered to God. I can't stress that enough. I love David's story. That's where his real influence started. Not in a palace, not in a position, but in his obedience to walk in his identity. Check this out, before anyone else even realized it. Now let's flip this back to you and me. If Jesus, the most influential leader in history, didn't need a title to change the world, and if David, one of the greatest kings in history, was a leader before he ever sat on a throne, why do you think you need a title to lead? Why do we convince ourselves that leadership starts when we have a stage, that it starts when we have a following or when we have a position? If Jesus showed us that identity is the foundation of true influence, and if David proved that leadership starts before recognition ever comes, then our first leadership breakthrough isn't about where we want to be. It's about recognizing where we already are. Recognizing where we already are. So let me ask you this. Where do you already have influence? Friends, too often we push leadership off into the future, thinking we'll step into it one day when we're ready. But leadership isn't waiting for you in some distant moment. It's already present in your life. The real question isn't, will I be a leader someday? The real question is, how am I stewarding the influence that I already have today? Think about it. Every single day, people are watching you. They're watching your words. They're watching your actions. They're watching your decisions. Whether you realize it or not, people are shaping their perception of you, and you're shaping them. If you're a parent, your children are looking up to you. They're looking to you as an example of how to navigate life. If you're in the workplace, your coworkers, your colleagues are taking cues from you about how to handle pressure, conflict, and responsibility. If you're active on social media, even your online presence carries influence, not just because you get a bunch of likes. What you post, what you engage with, what you celebrate, it is influencing people. Whether you're leading a team or just having conversation, casual conversation, your influence is always at work. You don't need the title of influencer to recognize you have influence. You don't have to be on stage to be a leader. You don't have to run a company or be a pastor of a church to have influence. Influence is about impact, not position. And if you take a step back and really look at your life, you'll see that you are already leading in more ways than you realize. The question is not, will I be a leader one day? Again, the question is, how am I stewarding the influence that I already have today? So right now, I want you to pause. I want you to reflect. Who do you have influence over in this season? Where are you already making an impact? Because the moment you recognize that, it's the moment you stop waiting for some future leadership opportunity and start maximizing where you are right now. That's when leadership awakening begins. I like to call it the leadership awakening. And that's what we're calling this tonight, the leadership awakening. Let's talk about mindset for a moment. Because whether you realize it or not, your mindset determines your leadership ceiling. Your mindset determines your leadership ceiling. You will never lead beyond the level of your thinking. If you believe leadership is for other people, you'll never step into the leadership God is calling you to. Plain and simple. If you believe you're not ready, you'll always find excuses to delay. If you believe your voice doesn't matter, you'll stay silent even when you were meant to speak. Your mindset is either the foundation of your leadership or it's the limitation of it. And this is exactly what we see in one of my favorite Bible stories in Scripture, the story of Gideon in Judges 6. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, I shared this with Liberation last week. Where was Gideon? He was not in the battlefield. He wasn't leading troops. He wasn't preparing for victory. No, Gideon was hiding. He was threshing wheat in a wine press, trying to stay out of sight, operating in fear, self-doubt, and insecurity. His circumstances had convinced him that he was powerless. His enemies had convinced him that he was weak. His own thoughts had convinced him that he wasn't leadership material. But what did God say? Friends, the angel of the Lord didn't call him by his fears. The angel of the Lord didn't call him by his excuses or his hiding place. He didn't say, Gideon, the hesitant one, or Gideon, the one who isn't quite ready yet. No, God called him mighty warrior. Before Gideon ever picked up a weapon, before he ever won a battle, his identity was already spoken over him. Gideon, mighty warrior. Here's what's so powerful about this. Gideon's circumstances didn't change in that moment. Friends, his enemies were still there. His limitations still existed. But what changed was the truth that God had spoken over him. God saw beyond where he was, beyond who he was, and spoke into who he was created to be. And here's the reality. Many of you are just like Gideon. You've let circumstances convict you that you're not a leader, convince you that you're not a leader. You've let past failures tell you that you're not capable. You've let fear keep you hiding in places you were never meant to stay. But what if I told you that your leadership is often waiting on you to catch up to what God has already spoken over you? God has already declared something over your life. He's already equipped you for great influence. The problem isn't that God hasn't called you. The problem is that your mindset hasn't caught up to your calling. So let me ask you this. What identity have you been living under? Have you been living under the label of not ready, not enough, not equipped? Or are you willing to shift your mindset and start aligning with what God has already spoken about you? I ask this for this reason. Because when you do that, when you break free from the ceiling of your own thoughts, that's when your real leadership begins. If you keep saying, I'm not a leader, I'm not ready, I don't have what it takes, you will live out that reality. But if you shift your mindset and start asking, how can I grow? How can I step up? What can I do? That's when your transformation begins. That's when transformation happens. One of the biggest myths about leadership is that you have to feel ready before you step into it. And here's the truth, y'all. The greatest leaders take action before they feel ready. The greatest leaders take action before they feel ready. If you're waiting until you have all the answers, all the skills, all the confidence, you'll be waiting forever. Because leadership isn't about waiting until you're comfortable. It's about being willing to step out even when you're not sure. Peter is a prime example. Matthew 4 says this, and it's one of the most boldest, is one of the most powerful moments in scripture. The disciples are all on a boat. The wind is raging, and suddenly they see Jesus walking on the water. Many of them were absolutely terrified. The Bible says they thought they were seeing a ghost. But Peter does something crazy, something radical. Instead of letting fear paralyze him, he does the unthinkable. He speaks out and he says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come on the water. Now, pause. Peter had no guarantee. He had never walked on water before. He didn't have a 10-step plan. He wasn't given an instruction manual. He said, if it's you, wasn't even sure if it's him. If it's you, call me. And what did Jesus say? One word, come. No qualifications, no tests, no blueprint, just an invitation. And here's the leadership principle that will change your life, especially if you grab a hold of it. Jesus didn't tell Peter where to put his foot. He just told him to step. Some of you have been waiting for God to lay out the entire plan before you. You're saying, God, show me the details. Make sure I have the resources. Make sure I feel qualified. But God is saying, just take the step, man. Leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about having enough faith to move on what God has already said. Jesus said, come. Peter's story reminds us that hesitation kills the momentum. Imagine if he had stayed in the boat, analyzing every possible outcome. He would have missed the miracle of walking on water. And that's what many of us do. We sit back, waiting for the perfect conditions, waiting for the perfect opportunity, waiting for the right moment. And in doing so, we miss the opportunity to step into the miraculous. So let me ask you, what's the one step that you've been afraid to take? Maybe it's a conversation that you need to have. Maybe it's a business you've been afraid to start. Maybe it's stepping up in your church, stepping up in your job, stepping up in your family. That one step, the one that makes your heart beat faster, the one that feels impossible, that's your leadership awakening moment. That's the step that will change everything for the rest of your life. And listen, I don't just want to inspire you. I want you to see this. I want to see you take action, because leadership isn't about what you know. Leadership is about what you do. Friends, I want to do this together. Right now, I want you to pause. I want you to identify that one step. I want you to name it. I want you to write it down. And this week, I want you to take that step. Because when you move, when you step out of the boat, you'll discover that God has already made a way for you to walk. He's made a way for you to walk where you thought that you would sink. grab a pen, open your notes app, whatever you need to do. Type, open up Word, type something. I want you to answer 3 questions. Okay? The first one is this: who do I influence daily? Think about your family, your coworkers, your friends, and understand that leadership is not just on stage. Who am I already influencing? The second one is this: where do I hesitate to step up as a leader? What's holding me back? Is it fear? Is it doubt? Is it comparison? Think about all of that and begin to question, what is it that's holding me back? And the third question: what action can I take over the course of this week to grow as a leader? It doesn't have to be big. It can be small steps. But understand this. Here's what I want you to know about small steps. Small steps create momentum. All you've got to do is get started. All you've got to do is start building momentum. Those small steps, over time, you'll look back and you'll say, wow, look how far I've come. So those are the 3 questions I want you to ask. I want you to answer. I want you to jot down those answers and then reflect on them. I need you to take action. Here's your challenge for the week. And for the next 7 days, step up in one area where you've been holding back. Take that first step, because that's where leadership starts. Plain and simple. And friends, leadership isn't something waiting for you in the future. It's something that begins the moment you recognize it. Here's what I'm asking you to do. In addition to that, if tonight's message, if tonight's leadership impact spoke to you, let me know in the comments. And I also want you to let me know this: what's the one step you're committing to take this week? Now, if you can't put it in the comments because it's private, that's fine. You can send me a direct message. If you don't want to do that, just simply respond, hey, I've identified my one step and I'm making sure I'm committing to taking that step this week. Why am I asking that? Because I'm going to be monitoring these comments over the course of this week, and I want to check in with you. I want to just send a short message that says, hey, you committed to taking that step with this week. You don't have to tell me what the step is. I'm just going to simply ask, did you take the step? How did you feel when you took the step? What happened when you took the step? I'm not even expecting there to be some like, man, the craze. I'm not expecting that to happen. All I want to hear is like, hey, I took the step. I took the step of faith. I'm acting. I'm not just sitting back, recognizing I'm a leader. I'm taking action. I understand it's not just in knowing and recognizing, but it's about action. And I'm taking action. I'm committing to take the step this week. This is just the beginning. Next week, we're going to go even further. And I am excited because we're going to be doing this each week now. The identity factor. That's what we're talking about next week. Leading from who you are, not just what you do. The identity factor. So make sure you're subscribed. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And I also want you to invite them to join us next week right here for Leadership Impact Night. Here's what I want you to know. You were created to lead. Now is the time to step into it. You were created to lead. Now is the time to step into it. If you are one of these individuals and I'm one of them as well, sometimes I get to that place, I just need to say something to myself. I need to speak it into myself because I know that there's power in me speaking to Benjamin. And Benjamin hearing what it is. It's not about pride. It's not about arrogance speaking like, oh, he's speaking in third, whatever it is, speaking in third person, whatever else. It's about making sure that I am hearing my own voice speak into my life. And here's what I want you to say: I have been created to lead, and I'm ready to step into it. I have been created to lead, and I am going to step into it. I have been created to lead, and I'm stepping into it now. Until next week, friends, I want you to have an awesome week. Again, type in the comments what your step is. Type in the comments what you're committing to do. If you can't, if you're not comfortable putting it in the comments, send me a direct message. If you're not comfortable in the direct message, giving me the details of it, that's fine as well. All I want you to do is say, hey, I'm committing to taking my step, just so I can make sure that we're walking in this together. Because accountability is a part of this. Now, it's not the type of accountability where I'm going to be on you like, you said you were going. No, it's just making sure that you know that you're not alone. That there's someone that is not just listening to you, but someone that's saying like, hey, I know you can do this. You committed to doing this, and I know you want to keep your word to yourself. It's not about keeping your word to Pastor Ben. It's about making sure you keep your word to yourself. If you're committing to doing this, I want to be that person that is in your corner saying, hey man, hey lady, friend, you said you were going to do this. I know you can do it. And if there's any struggle that you're having, let me know so that I can be in prayer with you. Let me know so I can speak a word of encouragement to you. Let me know so that we can take this step. We can make sure that you're taking the step into your leadership. Again, you were created to lead. Now is the time to step into it. Until next week, I want you to have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week, connecting with you, and hearing how God is already moving. Again, next week, we're jumping into identity, even more so into that identity aspect. We're going to be focusing on the identity factor, leading from who you are and not just what you do.